Tabungan yang 100% dilakukan secara online. Download aplikasi Simobi Plus. Registrasi dan verifikasi data diri secara lengkap. Terus tinggal selfie deh. Banyak keuntungan menariknya loh. Lebih mudah, lebih pintar dengan Simobi Plus. Download sekarang. Bank Sinar Mas, biasakan sekarang, luar biasa nanti.
Vitamin C 1000 Total Care. Kini dengan buffer vitamin C 1000 mg, vitamin D3 dan zinc bantu jaga daya tahan tubuh. Sekarang ada Hemaviton C 1000 Less Sugar dengan kalori lebih rendah. Boost immune, stay fit, stay active. Hemaviton C 1000 Total Care.
Ayo kita liburan. Berangkat.
Plus, siap menggantikan cairan tubuh yang hilang dengan 7 ion lengkap mudah diserap dari Wings Food.
Aku cinta mie sedap ayam bakar limau baru. Sedapnya next level.
Virus kuman bakteri cepat menyebar. Baru, Wis 24 Disinfektan dengan Actigar bunuh kuman bakteri jamur. Wis 24 Disinfecting Spray and Clean. Wis 24 Disinfektan Spray Surface and Air. Baru, Wis 24.
Alja Logistik memiliki 7 layanan dan coverage area Alja Logistik di seluruh Indonesia. Alja Logistik, we are faster and better.
All right, case building time is over. Please turn on your cameras. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Nicholas, and I will be your chairperson in this debate. The motion of the debate today is, in countries with high impact of terrorism, this House will use engagement tactics as opposed to non-engagement approach in fighting against terrorism. Today we have SMA CCA as team government and team SMA Regina Pacis Bogor B as team opposition. In team government, we have James Mario Fico as the Prime Minister, Ramsey as the Deputy Prime Minister, Marco as the government whip, and James Mario Figo as the government reply. In team opposition, we have Fabian as the leader of opposition, Geraldine as the deputy leader of opposition, Sharon as opposition whip, and Geraldine as opposition reply. Before we start the debate, please state your POI preference before starting your speech. To open the case, I invite the Prime Minister.
Sebelum Prime Minister, I just want to do roll call dulu. Kushai, are you here? Yep. Justin, are you here? Yep. Okay, Prime Minister, you can start your speech.
Right, okay, I'm audible, correct? Okay, if I ever start lagging, please tell me immediately so I can stop and connect to another Wi-Fi. Okay. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Right. Good afternoon, the opposition team and also the judges. Today, I'd like to speak on the motion that in countries with high impact of terrorism, this House would use engagement tactics as opposed to non-engagement approach in fighting against terrorism. Now, first, I would like to set this debate, of course, in countries with high impacts of terrorism. And of course, I'd like to put in some definitions here. Countries with high impact of terrorism, countries who are impacted heavily by terrorism, aka usually they are the target of terrorism attacks, or maybe they're mainly controlled by terrorists, but basically where terrorism is something that's very prevalent in those countries. What is terrorism? Well, terrorism is the act of intimidation, fear, and harm to civilians, important people, or places of interest with the purpose of showing a message and those terrorists are the people who believe in that message and are the ones who are doing these violent and aggressive acts. I'd like to start with a few characterizations here, is that the governments of these countries who are impacted by terrorism would 100% lose if they were to go in an all-out fight in a non-engagement tactic. One of the few reasons is that, first, when you account that they are highly impacted by terrorism, this would mean that their forces are significantly, they're significantly weaker compared to these terrorists because they are highly impacted by them. An extreme example of this would be Afghanistan, where after America left them open to attack by other terrorist attacks, the Taliban, terrorist organization, decided to take them over, and now so even just a small part of the government exists, and most of the other government have fled, or of course the remaining government has decided to take refuge in a small territory inside Afghanistan. If that government were to try to attack the Taliban back with non-engagement tactics, where their military and firepower are severely lacking compared to the Taliban, this would lead in them losing, and also in a crossfire, and the crossfire part will be mainly explained in the arguments part later. Right. Now, that's one that they would lose, but that's one of the extreme examples. But still, in majorly impacted, in highly impacted countries, usually the case is the same, but to a lesser degree. But in short, they would lose in the overarching battle. Now, this is the reason why engagement tactics such as diplomacy, compromising, negotiating, or other non-hostile measures are better in comparison to those for those countries' governments. And yes, I understand. If those countries' governments can't act, then why can't the other governments act? Now, here's the kicker. The other countries who can help from outside of the country which is highly impacted could possibly help via military. But here's the problem here. This brings us the violence problem, which again brings in how people could be caught in the crossfires, which again will be restated again in the arguments later. Plus, there is a better alternative to this for these countries who want to solve the terrorism in a country without actually engaging in an arms test. Of course, I'd like to also characterize what these terrorists actually want. You see, terrorism usually stems in the dissatisfaction of the status quo, in which it is directed to the enemies, which can be the government, minorities, or so on. But basically, okay, mainly the government in this case. They usually try to fight and trying to fight against terrorism only motivates these terrorists to fight even harder. And by fighting with violence, of course, they will try to fight with even harder violence. As such, we need to conduct this peacefully with engagement tactics. Now, situation is very urgent right now because people are suffering due to the effects of terrorism in these countries, and we need to solve the problem right now. But the problem is, if we solve them with these violent tactics, the people who we end up wanting to protect, which are the people in these countries, the civilians, the innocents, would be harmed in the long run due to these crossfires. Again, mentioned in the arguments later. Now, we need to understand how it is right now. Of course, the current way in which we handle splinter cells and terrorism is by force. We knock down bombing areas, and the fact that we believe that countries with high impact terrorism has impacted and controlled a large amount of the daily lives in which the people live in. The problem lies in which engagement approaches mainly hit civilian targets. Just these few months ago, for example, a US drone strike hit civilians, killing men, women, and children in one of the Middle East countries that they were trying to help the terrorism in. Now, we believe that in accordance to what happened here, we see that women and children are dying. And that is the very thing which creates and worsens terrorism. And this causes the feedback loop, or making even more terrorists and the resulting violence of death and destruction. Now, here I'd like to mention what the alternative of the governments of other nations could take to try to help the terrorism in these countries. Now, they could use their military power as actually leverage in helping the governments of these existing countries to help eradicate terrorism peacefully through diplomacy. As having this powerful military power from other countries could help in their discussions, leading to a more favorable discussion in the favor of the governments, whilst also avoiding more violent outcomes. And of course, another mechanism is that we would stop the bombs and aggression if it were to happen and maintain a security line on the line of control. After that, we would promote government investment into these smaller communities in order to stop distrust sown between the people and the government. This cuts them from their roots. This gives them no reason to terrorize, at least in theory. Is that the fact is that when terrorists radicalize people, they show videos of women and children dying to the government forces or any bad thing about the government. By slowly gaining the trust of the government, it decreases the incentive of radicalizing these people. And it's basically a slow incentive of them even becoming terrorists in the first place. And this would help counteracting later problems in the future. Now, these, of course, our end goal right now is to eradicate terrorism efficiently and fully without harming the people who we want to protect, which are the civilians in these countries. Now, on to my arguments. First, one must understand that, yes, remember that these terrorists are in these countries, and by being highly impacting in these countries means that either one of two things would happen. One, they'd have control, as I said before, or two, they would launch constant attacks, in which case, most likely, there will be some civilians that are trapped in the locations where these terrorists are, in which they become hostages. Now, since hostages are a thing that exists, these governments who try to help these countries would suffer a lot because they have the risk when fighting that the terrorists would fight back, not through firing at them, but firing at the hostages. By having a peaceful dispute, what could happen is that, yes, though they may threaten the hostages too, this could result in more favorable outcome, where it's not really violence we're pitting against here, it's really diplomacy and words we're fighting against here. At the worst case scenario, what would happen most likely is that, they're asking for a bailout for these hostages to go out, which is better than having their lives killed or threatened in the first place. Now, of course, second part is that it's hard to completely wipe a terrorist organization via violence because remnants exist and they could spread these ideologies. Because when you spread them by violence, you can't really remove an organization efficiently. You need to change their ideas. You need to make them peaceful or to try to eradicate them through ideologies so that they would not be a problem in the future. And of course, the crossfire of bad arguments will be brought by my second speaker later on. Thank you very much. I end my speech as the first speaker of the government.
Thank you. Now I invite the leader of opposition.
Am I audible?
Yep.
Okay. Your preference is through chat box. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. What? Said government's entire concern is continuing that there will always be casualties because of war. Panels, I think when countering terrorists is not just a problem that one country has. It's a problem, also a problem of international security organization has. It's also a problem of human rights country has that will help, right? Meaning all the concerns are tackled by the moment we have a strong protection and weapon rights to stop the terrorists and make sure that don't touch our citizens. So we want to stand up. We want to use non-engagement approach in fighting against terrorism. We want to achieve that. We want to, what we want to achieve, we want a concrete solution to fight, eradicate, and weaken the terrorists. Moving on, I have 3 points of mechanism. Firstly, we will allocate our budget to the military in this urgent scenario, meaning we will have a really huge preventive measure through soldiers being trained, weapon rights being upgraded, and improvement coming from countries like US who has strong military. And under the idea of trying to solve terrorism that they also want to do, because we realized that we were doing what we're doing can cause damage, so it's better if we prevent it. Secondly, international help exists to fight the terrorists and give humanitarian aid. Firstly, IMF will give us funding for humanitarian crisis in the midst of terrorism, for example. And secondly, international security organization of developed country will help us with the military, just like how the US helped Afghanistan. This is exclusive under our side of the house, because if side government wants to have this international aid and help, literally terrorists will see and question, why are you bringing a lot of international help when you want to compromise selfly? It's just make no trust that makes engagement techniques false. Hence, the preventive measure that happens under our proposition is only on the basis of trust. We say that humanitarian under our position is better, right? Exactly, we justify our preventive action like military intervention and whatnot. And third mechanism, both citizens and important people like president under our side of the house will be evacuated in a safe place far from where we are going to do the non-engagement approach, and this safe place will be highly protected by soldiers and international help. This is also exclusive under our side of the house, because under the government side, they will still need the importance of people like president or prime minister to do the negotiation with the terrorist group that makes the protection towards important people through under the government not happening, thus making the side government cause harmful. So our government concern about making a lot of people die are mitigate or even not happen at all. Going to my rebuttals, the country will lose. We'll say that that's why we told you from our mechanism we can help from countries that have the interest in stopping terrorism as a goal of human rights, like US, UN, and international security organization that also wants to stop terrorists, so they won't lose. Furthermore, we'll be told on my argument. Moving to my argument, first argument, why is this more justified to use non-engagement approach in fighting against terrorism? Let's just characterize what the high impact of terrorists are. Firstly, unpredictable, meaning we never knew how they think. What we know is dangerous. They have this huge one goal that they will do anything to second responses they use in power in that central country, meaning it's very hard to negotiate with them when literally they are large in number and they're not in the point of losing. That's mean it's going to be highly risky for you to negotiate with the terrorists when there is no urgency for them to step back and just giving up their goals to compromise with this country. And why is it likely? I think we think terrorists have a deeply rooted in the ideology that they want to really achieve, even if it takes a long time. Just like the Taliban who still try to dominate Afghanistan even for 20 years. And then what is a good parameter of discourse and negotiation? Firstly, a good discourse of discussion happen when first, both parties agree to listen toward each other. Secondly, they both have the incentive to come at once decision or the same goal at the end. And secondly, by those characterization panels, proposition have to push first. Why do both parties have the incentive to listen toward each other? We don't think this insurgent group wants to succumb into a discussion, right? See how the Taliban has been offered several times of discourse with countries to seek for an agreement, but they never have the incentive to actually have a discourse. It's actually because they know that what is going to result from the discussion is only countries asking them to succumb and withdraw. And then second, exactly by the reason before, We also do not see an incentive from this insurgent group to come with the same decision according to what other country wants and vice versa. Thus, even if, yes, this country terrorist agrees for discussion, we don't think it's going to be fruiting a good agreement anyway. Exactly, both halfway in different interests. The terrorists want closure from the radical interests, while contrary interests are to create a preventive measure. And thirdly, has panels. Their whole claims false because it proves to you how it doesn't give certainty of benefit through discourse, and all the case of the government is full of risk that what makes it unjustified. Moving to my third layer of our argument, why under government that will only create a false sense of security towards the society. Panels, let's just contextualize the world in these layers as UN. Almost 3,000 people were killed, and panels, we cannot imagine what or how the society will think the moment they see that their president is being besties by having diplomatic agreement with terrorists that cause that big trauma toward the society. We say this is unjustified because the government failed to protect the society by giving this false sense of security. But even if government wants to contextualize this out of United States, we say this is also harmful, right? Because that what makes society feel safe in the moment. They see their government show concrete action like pushing the terrorists, giving big preventive, and tackling the terrorists at the first place. And we don't see this action coming in the government side of the house. Exactly why under our claim are better. And then even at the workplace of this casualty happen. First of all, the ones going to war are those soldiers who dedicate their lives to be protector of the country, and they realize the risk. And secondly, the fact that we are doing a non-agreement approach, I think that we are doing some dangers. That means we are going to also have evacuation for the phenomenon important people, so they protect. And in my conclusion, we believe that our side of the house is better by doing non-engagement enforcement to the terrorists, because we give more clearer and more sense way to fighting the terrorists by making them weaker and not just doing a small sense movement by discuss with unpredictable terrorists. That's all for me. Thank you.
To expand the case, I invite the Deputy Prime Minister.
Hello, am I audible? Also, because of current conditions, I'm not able to turn on my camera. I hope that's fine. So my POI preferences, just unmute yourself. And also, and my pronouns are he, him. And I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay. So first of all, I'd like to rebut a few points earlier stated by the first speaker of opposition. The first one being is that with huge military power, as in with huge military power and directly conflicting with this, conflicting with these big terrorist groups. You're saying as if that will give people more security. The thing is, we also need to think about the territories where they will be fighting. We need to think about the small communities where these terrorist groups might attack. First of all, I would like to characterize these small communities. These small communities are usually out of the reach and sight of government and have a lot of distrust, which I'll explain later, and because they aren't helped much by the government. And why would they like to target this? Because first of all, I'd like to explain the main cause of terrorism. The main cause of terrorism is essentially distrust within the people and the government. And because of this distrust, these terrorist groups feel the need to take such drastic action to go against the huge government that is currently oppressing the people. Now, with this ideology at hand, and this ideology supporting this entire terrorist group, the thing is, if these terrorist groups are able to show, or even if these normal people are able to believe that that the government is doing something bad and is not helping them at all, they will more likely support the terrorist groups. Now, I'd like to move on why this is important. Okay, these terrorist groups start out usually small and are usually based off a simple radical ideology. And the thing is, this ideology is what makes it dangerous. This ideology that is born from the distrust between the people and the government can make the group bigger if more people distrust it. Now, I would like to explain why distrust is more likely to happen on their side of the house. Okay, so first of all, we need to talk about the crossfire. You say as if crossfire won't happen because we're sending the casualties that we're sending in our soldiers that would kill for the country. But we need to talk about the fact that these terrorist groups rely on the support of normal people. And the thing is, with the support of normal people, these soldiers won't be able to tell apart who is the enemy. For all they know, the civilian could be a terrorist, or for all they know, the terrorist could be a civilian. And with that in mind, it is hard for them to directly fight against these terrorist groups. Why? Because they aren't even able to tell them apart. Now, with that in mind, this will cause a lot of crossfire, and crossfire is more likely to happen on your side of the house. And as stated earlier, because it's hard to tell them apart, it is very likely for these people to accidentally shoot someone who may not even be a terrorist at all, but showing signs of aggression. Now, now I would like to move on with why applying more non-engagement tactics will harm. So now, if you're saying as if, oh, we can just tell them apart with like background checks and such. The thing is, we need to consider how you're going to do it. You need to do intensive searching and invade their privacy. You need to invade the privacy of these normal people, which makes them feel less safe. And this feeling this feeling of making them less safe will cause more distrust between them and the government. This is important. Why? Because this means that they're more likely to support terrorist groups, and they're more likely to even join them. Now, there are multiple cases. For example, Papuan people getting killed by TNI because they thought they were part of the Papuan Merdeka Revolution. Now, I would like to move on with more of these rebuttals. The first one is that you said discourse requires listening to each other and going towards the same goal. And what we're saying is that instead of the government trying to fight back, the government should listen to them. You're saying discourse won't happen because their interests are different. In the end, both ideologies are just trying to do what's best for the country, right? And because of that, it is much more likely for discourse to happen. It is much more likely for discourse to happen. They just need to find some common ground, and they need to find the same goal. And this is more likely to happen in discourse. Now, with again, if you say that they might not listen to discourse at all because the government itself has very little leverage, that's why, as stated by our first speaker, that with help from other countries, instead of directly fighting against them, we can use that as leverage. To fight against these terrorist groups. As you stated yourself, these terrorist groups want to make sure that their ideology spreads and make sure that the people get what they need, and that these people get the support they need and such. And because of that, they don't want that ideology to stop and just vanish out of nowhere. And because of that, it is much better to essentially just make sure that these people. It is better to make sure that this aisle we have some sort of leverage during this discourse. Now, another thing that you mentioned is that it's not only a problem of their own country, so it is the responsibility of other countries as well to call terrorism. We absolutely agree. We even mentioned, as stated earlier, where their support could be used as leverage. And you said that the IMF will give us funding in the midst of violence to help fight terrorism. This is exclusive to your side. We don't see how that's exclusive to your side. When one must remember that since violence happens first from the side of the terrorists, the IMF could have an incentive to help us who are fighting these terrorists. Money we could use to create leverage and help in discussions via bails or even strengthening the military. So from being at disadvantage. So we're not going to use this at all to directly fight against them, but to make sure that we can make peace with them and make sure that we are in the state of creating discourse. It does not make sense to bring in militaries as leverage because terrorists would grow wary. That's the point. That's the point. And because that is the whole point, and with them being wary, they are more likely to at least agree to some form of discourse and some form of agreement. And as stated earlier, having diplomatic agreements with terrorists would look bad in the eye of the people. having a diplomatic discussion is different from friendly agreement here. This happens in war too. Simply educate the country's people that this is the best approach possible. And the thing is, from these discussions and discourse, the results could even be more favorable and less casualties can happen overall. Now, and then another thing is that we argue that sense of false security could also be that sense of false security, because now they know that the government wants to constantly be hostile towards this group, which the terrorists will use to recruit more and more anti-government forces, as stated earlier. That is all for my speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now I invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Am I audible?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. Setting my timer, POI just unmute. Pronoun she, her. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. So firstly, I would rebut their case about the core cause of terrorism is distrust. But we want to say that an inherent interest of terrorism is they would do anything to exercise their faith and belief, even if it's cost their lives, since they already left behind their families or former life to devote the terrorist ideology. So we don't think that trusting the terrorists or not trusting the terrorists is the core cause of terrorism, right? So firstly, they told you the country will lose the fight and it's too violent. Firstly, it's to the best case for government to just play on our worst case that the country will lose. Secondly, panel, if side government concedes to violence, meaning that there is a benefit that we can have, which is to stop the terrorists, right? To weaken the terrorists with our weaponries, etc. Because if side government's concern is violence towards citizens, we can evacuate them. Why? Because we realize from the start what we're doing is non-engagement war. That means it's very possible for us to protect the citizens in the first place. Thirdly, even if there are violence, let's just weigh the violence and harm that is happening. Under government, the harm and violence is very much possible. Why? Firstly, the terrorist group have a really huge ideology they want to achieve, which is to take over countries that's so radical and harmful. And that is very likely to happen if they see an opportunity like through this negotiation, because the countries will lower ground, for example. And the important people are the ones who's going to meet the terrorist groups that going to be so harmful, because you're risking an important person that is the figure of the country, for example. To meet a group of terrorists can have a huge plans behind them that is very unpredictable. That side government never rebutted regarding the unpredictability of the terrorists, right? But under opposition, sure, there is violence, but firstly, at least the ones who are doing the violence are soldiers and militaries who are dedicated their life to be the protector of the country, and they realize the risk. Secondly, but if we're talking about protecting the society and the important people and vulnerable, that is the most significant to our country, because they're the leaders and the ones who can contribute to the country to run the country when there is a huge problem. But thirdly, the fact that we realize we are doing a non-engagement approach, we told you how evacuation is possible, which we got no engagement on. So this can happen under government. Why? Firstly, if you are trying to evacuate society and also try to improve military like side government and protect important people, you will still make the important people stay to and do the negotiation because they are the figure of the country. So the evacuation of protection that side government make is insignificant because these important people aren't going to be evacuated. They will meet the terrorists, risking their life, for example, making society scared because their leader are meeting the terrorists. But okay, even though there are citizens dying, but let's just weigh the harm. Literally, under side governments, they're going to make firstly people living in fear because the government are not trying to highly protect the society just for the sake of trust to the terrorists. Secondly, a high risk of people and important people being harmed easily because these important people are most likely doing this negotiation. For example, the president, the prime minister, the magnitude of risking important people is so high because terrorists are so unpredictable. Just like suddenly Afghanistan was taken over by Taliban, it was so unpredictable happening. Society can also get hurt because on how you don't want to show intimidation, so you lower your gun. But at least under opposition, you always fully aware that they will attack you. We try to make the terrorists weaker than us, and you will try to defend the society to the fullest and evacuate the society and hide the society. And the first speaker also mentioned about threaten the hostages. But firstly, we say this is an extreme scenario where it's not our burden to prove this, and yet, even if yes, this is the concern, we say using our preventive mechanism, we already told you that we would evacuate people first rather than their side, no evacuation mechanism at all. And secondly, this is an exclusive. In fact, it would be worse on your side because characterizing terrorists are unpredictable and have no interest in upholding humanitarian values. It's likely for these hostages to die on your side. Comparatively, at least we have the upper hand to attack and have no mercy for them, right? In conclusion, we believe that our side of the house is better by doing non-engagement approach to this terrorists because we give more clear and more sensible way to fighting the terrorists by make them weaker and not just doing a small chance movement by discuss with the unpredictable terrorists. Now to my extension about why you make the terrorists stronger under government side and it's so harmful. One framing, when you compromise, there would be a mutual benefit or something that isn't harmful being made or given. The type of discourse will definitely be a win-win solution, right? For both parties, it's never gonna be an agreement that harms each other. But then, even if this is a win-win solution, this is still harmful. Why is that so? Because what will the negotiation looks like under proposition is how the country agrees to not intervene the terrorists and how the terrorists will not intervene the country, right? Even if that seems not evil, we say that this is unjust because how the moment there is no intervention, what will happen is how the insurgents will have more time to train, develop their powers, recruiting more members through their radical ideology, and etc. This is a world that governments would live in, right? And therefore, you would continuously make terrorists grow and you won't stop them. When literally countries still know and have this fear towards the terrorism because of Taliban problem. The fact that Taliban has recently grown after 20 years is because US withdraw and there's nothing to stop Taliban anymore. There's no fear being imposed, so Taliban attack. And B, we said what makes terrorists to stop and become weak is exactly when you engage war with them. Like terrorists in Afghanistan becoming super strong because US withdraws and doesn't harm the terrorists. This scenario would also happen the same. You negotiate, meaning no one gets harmed because you want a win-win solution. You're just the same as making terrorists grow stronger by not stopping them. For example, when this negotiation is happening, then it's likely for these terrorists to advance their weaponry, their strategies, train their soldiers, and on your side, it would be likely they would rebel when they are already stronger. They would rebel your negotiation, they would rebel your agreement when they know they are stronger, especially when we realize terrorists are under the same ideology, meaning that Taliban are likely to help these terrorists to take over. Literally, the Taliban after 20 years are still trying to take over and attack, means they have a really strong ideology to begin with, in which they won't trade anything with that kind of ideology. So comparatively, our side would fix this because even if terrorists are willing to die anyways and would not stop, then this is where our preventive measures could be significant and reach the goal to less or to no more terrorist attacks, because we won't stop to show that we have the upper hand in the military, and we would make the terrorists spend all of their resources until they ran out, right, for example. And even if not ran out, at least they have less power, which would never happen on government side. Then comparatively, their harms is when you want to have this negotiation and the terrorists would actually train and bigger in their power, for example, and would likely to rebel your own agreement, your side falls proud to oppose.
To summarize the case, I invite the government whip.
Hi, so sorry. Before that, can I go to the toilet first?
Yep, all right.
Hi, I'm back.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, before I start my speech, I would like to say that the POI, please just unmute for a sec. There we go. Please just unmute for POI, and I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, so the first things first, to understand that about this debate, I would like to have the opposition team has to commit to 2 questions. Ladies and gentlemen, how does the opposition team ever justify the deaths of civilians? We have quoted in our status quo that military intervention, that doing everything in force happens and kills civilians in the crossfire. And my second question is, how does opposition team make sure that there will be no more terrorists getting recruited? Because we have shown you by our second speaker and first speaker that when we use force, even if we quote unquote eradicate the terrorists, even if we quote unquote wipe them out, the fact is that there will be teachings of peace. The fact is that the teachings will go on to create even more terrorists in this sick feedback loop of terrorists and violence from both government side and the terrorist side. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the world which is proposed by opposition, and this is why we propose to use engagement tactics. But first, my rebuttals. Ladies and gentlemen, the opposition side of the house says that the problem is that we both agree that about the Afghanistan example. However, that is exactly the worst case scenario in which the country falls into disarray, falls into terrorist attacks due to there not being enough engagement with the people, in which the Taliban can just recruit even more disgruntled people who do not trust the government. The second rebuttal is that they say that terrorists devote enough time to terrorism, so trusting them is not the best case. What? The distrust part is the origin of terrorism. That's just how we characterize them. And it is, in fact, that it is how most terrorist organizations form, through distrust of the status quo. And third, risking an important person in diplomacy risks image, while on our side, in which opposition side, they claim that they have soldiers to fight. First, is risking image and the life of a person really more important than the multitude of people that are caught in the crossfires every day in the fight against terrorism? And are you seriously treating civilian lives that lowly? And I must point out that the opposition side has never vowed to protect a vulnerable actor. And third, if so, then they have failed as the government again. And so for my other rebuttal is that hostages are an extreme scenario. Admittedly, that was one of the worst case scenarios. But on your side of the house, it is so much worse. Decline. It is so much worse, as discussions cannot formally happen.
Sorry, POI, please.
Decline. As discussions are not formally happening, and it easily spirals down into combat. Well, on our side of the house, at least there's a chance for these people to make it out alive. And again, it is so much easier to discuss their fate through diplomacy, whether it is through compromises, bails, or using the money given by other countries and the non-exclusive IMF funds, which have been stated by my second speaker. And third, terrorists could grow larger and betray the agreements, they say. We believe that the not giving up part was already rebutted by us before, and that part they could become stronger. Well, yes, that is something that could happen. That is also a worst case scenario, but at least we have an agreement. In such agreements, the government should be trusted to involve in at least an agreement to watch over the terrorists in case any fishy shenanigans happen. And decline. Sorry, no POI. And lastly, terrorism would grow easier in government scenario, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that is actually the opposite case. We have already said that we have the leverage from other countries outside And I must point out, despite all the way you're stopping us, despite all that, what's stopping us from employing part of your mechanism? What's stopping us from simply taking your mechanism and simply not using force? Simply What's stopping us to put heavily armed guard and receiving foreign military aid in every block and putting leaders in small places, then negotiating through satellites and the such? There's no stopping it. And finally, them going out of the way to kill terrorists and hunt them down is that this is just worse. We believe that terrorists will commit terror for a reason. No one wants to kill each other. To have negotiations which both sides of the house can get something out of it will be respected due to the win-win solution, as you said, by your side of the house. So finally, on to my clashes. My first clash is very simple. It's door kicking versus handshaking. Which would happen? Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that we win this clash because first, as said by my first speaker, in hostage situations. Second point, you're only going to make the problem even worse because you're only making even more terrorists. The client POI, you're not solving the problem and you are just making the problem appear as if less. We have already told you from our first and second speaker that combat only makes even more terrorists. And finally, my third point is that we are only slowly weeding out and basically deleting the incentive of terrorists. We're trying to make it so that there is no incentive to become a terrorist. There is no incentive to fight the government, to kill people. It is because your life is already good. It is because now the incentive is gone, as explained by my first and second speaker. And finally, contrast on their side of the house, in which they are making the problem worse in this cycle of violence, which creates even more terrorists, in which civilians will be under constant threat of bombing or getting shot from both terrorists and government. So, to put this into simple, let's do a case comparison. Ladies and gentlemen, their side of the house wants to fight and eradicate and weaken the terrorists. The fact is that this is the status quo. The fact is that this is what every country is doing right now. And the problem and we have shown you how this status quo is already problematic to not only countries, even from countries with support from other countries, even with international support. And ladies and gentlemen, the other part of this side is that they never actually counted the part in which we explain how their side of the house will not stop the flow of recruits to the terrorist organizations. We have explained how distrust in the government sows terrorism. We have explained how terrorists use this distrust to claim even more personnel to their side, to their cause. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the main problem of their side of the house. Contrast this to our side of the house, in which we can talk it out and we can talk to these citizens to go and not commit acts of terrorism. We also, on the other side of the house, commits more into the force option, which not only breeds even more mistrust and hatred to the government and makes more terrorists. We have more substantial changes from the ground up in which we can root out the incentive of the terrorists. So let's put this simple. Imagine it's either as a civilian, government's forces shoot your mother and sister, and now you have to become a terrorist. Or now government are building you, are helping you, are giving you economic prosperity and they don't kill your children. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the way. This is why I propose.
Thank you. Now I invite the opposition whip.
Hi, am I audible?
Yep.
If you have any POI, just unmute yourself because I won't be looking at the chat box. POI through unmuting. I go by Shay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think what side government, I think that side government is very dismissive about, right? What side government is very dismissive about is when they told you how violence and death to civilians is so harmful, when we told you how the ones doing the war is the soldiers and military who choose to be militaries and risk their life. But even if, yes, they have never proved to us how, then why, then this is only exclusive under opposition only, right? When we gave you likelihood regarding how unpredictable terrorists are and how deeply rooted terrorists are towards this ideology, right? Two clashes that will directly clash towards their whole claims. We win this debate, their case falls. First clash, who protects the civilian and the society more, right? what we get in response in this clash. Firstly, they told us on how opposition is going to create more destruction. First response, we bite the bullet and we say this is totally okay. Why? 3 reasons. Firstly, because this is our last resort. This is the last resort of ours. Secondly, we have humanitarian aid, which implies and will also help towards all civilians and all societies destructed, right? Thirdly, the one who will be harmed by the destruction is the terrorists, not the local society and even the military who have committed their life and to like serve in the military, right? Who are already consented to risk their life. Second response, destruction is something inevitable, right? No matter what the highly impacted country and the country, what the highly impacted country and the country of the insurgent will always be destructed anyway, especially when the insurgent groups gone mad. But what makes opposition better is because how we can cater towards all the society, right? We even if yes, we cater towards the society, even if yes, destruction happens, we cater to the most vulnerable actor. Third response, the moment they say how you want to tell and advocate the society that this method of approach is the best approach, when we assume you agree with our cases, right? The moment you tell you want advocacy, no thank you. The moment you told them you want advocacy, we assume you agree with our cases. Why is that so? Because this will only give the society a false sense of hope. Why is that so? You telling them that this is the best alternative is going to embolden the narrative that everything is fine. The government has done the best precautionary measure regarding the whole terrorist attacks, right? This rebuts your claims regarding how there will be no incentive and how incentive will exist and how distrust will exist, right? Exactly because of this false sense of hope, all the societies will having this distrust towards the government. But then moving to my second response, talking about hostages, right? First response, panels, less characterization coming from them. Why then the moment your side is having a soft approach, then insurgent groups will less likely make people hostages, right? Because we say this is something inexclusive to begin with. But then second response, this is untrue, panels. What makes people hostage is exactly because you don't have any humanitarian aid or help towards locals, right? Comparatively, under our side of the house, we give them because we're not linked with any agreement that opposes any military intervention. We give them better life, right? But more, third response, not only hostage panels, the expansion of terrorist groups is going to be bigger under proposition. Why is that so? This directly clash towards their claims, right? Why is that so? Firstly, you give them time to expand their kingdoms. You give the insurgent groups time to expand, to train, and to create missiles and whatnot. No intervention, no destruction of resources coming towards the insurgent groups gives them the justification of authority. But then secondly, the moment you stay shut and create no intervention, you give them the sense of justification towards their authoritarianism. Panels notice how Afghans join Taliban not because they want to, right? But they only have two choices, which is to die or to live. Exactly. The moment these countries do not have any intervention and help the authoritarianism of the Taliban or other insurgent groups, that's where the number of members explode. Exactly because all these innocent people, the civilians, they do not have the choice to live except to like join the insurgent groups, right? But then thirdly, sadly, you cannot do any intervention because you will only be seen as an entity who contradicts. If there's no intervention, then how could you give this aid towards the insurgent groups, right? Then I was about to ask this to you, government, and help you because we want this answer. But then since government whip told me to be quiet and shut up, then sorry, this is your loss because exactly this is what we question. This is the big point. But then in conclusion, why do we win this clash? Exactly because we protect towards the civilian, right? But then they also stated the part of terrorists is also the civilian. We do not get why the protection, why we have to protect them, right? Exactly because they're part of the terrorists. Why do we have to protect the part of the terrorists, even if they're civilians, right? But then even if yes, we have to protect the civilians from joining more of the terrorism, right? Moving to my second clash, why we fight the terrorists better. First response, diplomacy is better, right? They stated on how diplomacy is better. First response, first of all, we get no engagement regarding how diplomacy is a part of the interest of society and the country when literally we gave you reasonings regarding how risking important people and the figure of the country meeting the terrorists is something that gives fear towards society. Second response, we say diplomacy isn't better for the exact reason you're going to lower down your guns and it's very risky when it comes to doing it against the terrorists, which then we get no response regarding the characterization of terrorists, of how unpredictable they are, which we think they agree on. But then third response, even if diplomacy is better, then the question still remains, why does this give certainty of terrorists to not attack back when you're literally not harming them and weaken them? Literally, terrorists was never educated about human rights, right? We still question why would they rebel under your side of the house? Because what better is there is certainty of benefits under our side of the house that we are able to weaken the terrorists, make sure they use their weapons and soldiers rather than hurting the society, right? Second response, second rebuttals, they told us on how countries are weaker. First response, panels, we don't think that they are actually weaker only because they are highly impacted by the terrorists, right? Notice that the countries have allies, like how United States is the target of Taliban, but they have AUKUS and also Blue Dot networks as their backups. Second response, comparatively under proposition, it is going to be weaker due to one, they have the same bargaining power, so it's going to be less likely for them to get help because because of the agreement, right? It's going to see, it's never going to happen exactly because the moment other country helps, they will be seen helping, and the entity who is in the middle of the agreement will seen violating the agreement. But then secondly, the moment you both champion your soft approach, you always have to succumb to the soft approach. The moment you violate this, you will be calling out, right? So your claims are never going to be sustained anyway. And then third response, but even if yes, this is true, we say this is also harmful. Firstly, when this happens to developing countries, small bargaining power will only lead them into succumbing towards the solution offered by the terrorists because of their insecurity and lack of lobbying power. But then secondly, when this happens to developed countries, this is also super harmful, right, panels? Because they do not have the chance to do preventive measure because they already have this agreement that helps them, which then moves to my last response, talking about funding, right? First response, the panels, again, another dismissive one. We never say that funding is something exclusive under our side of the house, and this should not be debated. But then second response, we have proven to you why this arm strengthening is something that could happen, because that you what will you do is only make them the terrorists more furious because of a contradiction. But then yes, what will happen on your side is only a waste investment. So proud to oppose for opposition.
To close the case, I invite the opposition reply.
Okay. I'm audible, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Just a sec. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. First thing to point out that there are being dismissive panels. We gave you reasonings regarding how the soldiers and military are the ones doing the war, meaning the ones going to be harmed are the soldiers first in our worst case scenario, which we told you this is fine because they're soldiers and we got no engagement on why this is still bad. Meaning, if we're talking about hurting the society, it's still mitigated, right? The terrorist has to fight you as the country, the international security country first, which means the harm is so less when it reaches society, because we want this non-engagement effort in the very start. So two clashes then in this debate. Firstly, about destruction, and is destruction fine? Secondly, why we better fight the terrorists? In this first clash, destruction, we have told you that there would not be destruction on our side, because when we know we're going to opt into non-engagement approach, then we have the preventive measurements, which is to evacuate the people first. But secondly, this is worse on your side because the ones that are being hostage are like the important people who make the or sign the agreement. Thirdly, destruction would be comparatively worse on your side because you are just going to prolonging these terrorists to fight back when they are growing stronger. And lastly, this is justified because this is our only last resource into years on years of terrorism attack, right? So therefore, we think that this deterrence towards the terrorists is the only way. Therefore, this is principally justified. So what do we get in their response? They told us that there will be violence. We gave you reasonings regarding why violence isn't going to happen towards the citizen, because how strong our military power is from our mechanism, especially with the help of global superpower like US. Moreover, we told you that the ones doing the war are soldiers and militaries that devoted their life for war. But okay, secondly, even if it's true, there is violence, at least what's most important thing that we give you is that we are able to protect the most important people in the country, that we don't risk them by meeting the terrorists who have unpredictable plans. Because what makes it important is when we're able to protect these important peoples and stop the terrorists at the very least, even with violence, right? But that no, they told us that no more casualties happen anymore. But how do we weigh this principle? We have told that the soldiers and all people that join the war are people who know the risk. They already sacrificed themselves in order to eradicate the terrorists that harm the world and make big trauma for a lot of people, right? On your side, you haven't weighed your principle as to why is okay then you would risk these important people, for example, and you would prolong your own suffering towards the terrorism, right? And now this is why this is justified, because this is our last resource. Now to my second clash, why we better fight the terrorists. We have told you that firstly, we won't stop to show we have the upper hand in military. Secondly, we would make the terrorists spend all of their resources until they ran out of resources. Even if not ran out, at least they have less power, which would never happen on government side. They never engage on this analysis as to how we could paralyze the terrorists. Therefore, they concede that this analysis still stands. Lastly, terrorists would grow stronger on your side, since when you are doing this diplomatic approach, these terrorists will actually stab you behind the back and would be rebel when they are growing stronger. But what do we get in response? They told you that the country will lose. As we told you before, we will have international security organizations for help us in this. And what the international want to do is eradicate the terrorists. And because of this means your argument about the country will lose just the worst case scenario that can't tackle our argument. It wasn't enough just to say that the country will lose because of high impact of terrorism. But second rebuttal, creating trust so there's more recruitment of terrorists. This is their side's proposal, right? But until the last speaker, they never engage as to how this is the interest of the terrorists, since we have already told you that the interest of terrorists is to kill or die, right? We can't give even credit as to how this engagement would work because there are no step-by-step analysis. Compared to finals, we have already given you analysis as to why this is the inherent interest of terrorists to protect their own ideology. And lastly, even though agreement would happen, we told you that when terrorists grew, they actually would be rebel to the military forces, for example, or the people that agreed to sign the agreement in the end of the day, proud to oppose.
Thank you. Now I invite the government reply.
Okay. Okay. First of all, I'd like to clarify. About the telling them to be quiet part. My first speaker never said that. Really, we just said that we respectfully decline that. So please don't take that to heart. Okay. Right. Now also my POI preference. I forgot to mention that my first speaker speech is to just unmute a POI. Trust me, even if I tell you no, even if I tell you bluntly, we are not overly rejecting that, as in like rejecting you unmuting. We're just telling you that no, we respectfully decline your POI. All right, right. If that's all understand, then I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Right. Good afternoon again, the judges and also the opposition side. As the reply speaker, I wholeheartedly and vehemently mentioned that we win this debate for a multitude of reasons. First of all, it seems the side opposition has mentioned multiple times that we were being dismissive in our arguments, in which case I say that that is wrong. We have acknowledged what they have said multiple times, and they have said, and actually, what I actually want to say is that they have actually been dismissive to not only our arguments, but also to their own arguments. First of all, I like to mention on the part where my second speaker says that the IMF my first speaker mentions that the IMF funding that you said that was exclusive on your side is actually non-exclusive, and it's also helpful for us as well. Well, first of all, the first speaker of the opposition seems to have mentioned that that is not the case, and it seems that they have rebuked their own point, which is a bit weird to say the least. So yeah. And as the first point of an example of them being dismissive, and of course, part of us being dismissive towards us is that they say multiple times that our methods are deficient in removing terrorism, when we have specifically mentioned that our end goal is to eradicate terrorism as a whole, so that it's not a future problem. By practicing diplomacy and not practicing inefficient violence that could result in remnants of these terrorists resurging in the future, they have instead said that that is their part. Well, no, it is actually our argument that by dociling, by making peace, by making amends with these terrorists, by making them at least manageable, in which they are not doing violent acts, is that we will remove the factor that they will become a problem in the future. And we have also rebuked the multiple arguments of them saying that these are that us making the military protect the people during the diplomacies with satellites and such is suddenly part of their argument. That doesn't make sense, because that's diplomacy. Their diplomacy is us having these other countries protect and leverage them so that they could reach peaceful and more favorable discussions, so that they could lead into more favorable results for the countries that are being impacted. Also, they say that the countries aren't weaker if they are highly impacted by terrorism. When we have mentioned in the definition, and I definitely did not hear the definition challenge there, that these countries that are highly impacted by terrorism are severely weakened, or at least weaker than the terrorists that impact their country. As such, now I will mention the most parts of our arguments. Right. Hostages. The hostages one I have mentioned that is worst case scenario on our side, and of course they have also agreed. Oh, there's a worst case scenario on our side. But first of all, you need to agree that their part does not have a solution to this. They say that humanitarian aid fixes this. It just makes sense. That's not how humanitarian aid works. Hostages are something you say, oh, we're humanitarian aid. We come to pick up the hostages. That doesn't make sense. So instead, what happens here is that hostages on their side are still there. They're still being threatened. When you do violent acts, the terrorists say, oh crap, we're about to lose. Oh no, time to shoot the hostages, time to threaten them with violence. Oh, that's bad. On our side, we have the chance of using bails from the IMF funding that you have said also, and from other countries as leverage in discussions to make them be better. Also, when we already said multiple times, and I've said also previously, it's hard to completely wipe out a terrorist organization by violence. Again, that makes sense, because when you eradicate terrorist organization via violence, doesn't mean that all of the organizations are going to be eradicated fully. Imagine like ISIS. Okay, that's an example, sorry. But basically, they're going to research later on in the future, which is something that your side has not addressed at all. Now, of course, the part of the crossfire. You said that soldiers are going into fight in place of important people being in these diplomacy debates. Now, of course, we have mentioned that we are going to protect these important people and we are not going to allow them to fall. Of course, on their side, they say, oh, soldiers are fine. And we also agree, yes, soldiers are part of the military. But the problem here is that the people who are caught in the crossfire between the government and the terrorists, what are going to happen to them? They are at risk. And also, we have not rebuked at all the part of us trying to find the terrorists in the midst of civilians, and that could lead to also harming civilians, because we don't know who are terrorists and who are civilians because of the lack of information that we have regarding these organizations. It does not make sense for the government to engage in engagement acts in this case, and also because of that, they have not rebuked that. This is why we win and they don't. We have rebuked most of their cases, and they have failed to rebut ours. Thank you, and I end my speech as the reply speaker of the government.
Thank you, everybody that has participated in this debate. Now, all of you may turn off your cam. Now, I will thank the sponsors. Binus Universitas, PT Sinamas TBK. Ini bisa buat tabungan, nggak perlu ke bank, prosesnya mudah, online saja loh. Selain nabung secara digital, kamu bisa beli pulsa, top up e-wallet, bayar jajanan pakai QRS, dan beli e-voucher dengan harga diskon dari banyak brand toko dan resto favorit kamu. Dengan menggunakan SIMO B+, kamu bisa menikmati gratis transfer antar bank dan promo undian harian berhadiah, e-voucher, belanja hingga 1 juta dari program Kaki Hip Hip Hooray. Banyak keuntungannya kan? Tunggu apa lagi? Download SIMO B+ sekarang dengan scan barcode yang ada di sini atau kunjungi bit.ly/SIMO B+. PT Eurocars Motor Indonesia, jangan lupa ya follow Instagramnya @mazda_id. PT Tempo Scan Pacific, PT Howden, sosial media mereka adalah @howden.id, Twitter @Howden Indonesia, Facebook, dan LinkedIn Howden Insurance Brokers Indonesia. Jasindo, PT Sayap Mas Utama, WIS 24. Siapa yang sudah kangen ketemu teman-teman pada saat Canisius Cup? Pasti kangen tanding kan? Pada masa pandemik ini tentu akan banyak bakteri dan virus COVID, maka diperlukan hand sanitizer dan cuci tangan pakai masker, dan tentunya pakai disinfektan ya. Aku mau kenalin nih disinfektan yang bagus, namanya WIS 24. WIS 24 ini sudah terbukti secara klinis mampu membunuh 99,9% virus, bakteri, dan jamur termasuk SARS-CoV-2 dan human coronavirus. Dan dengan teknologi ActiGuard WIS 24 dapat membunuh virus dan bakteri di permukaan selama 24 jam. Tinggal semprot, lalu lap, meja dan kursi teman-teman terlindungi selama 24 jam. Tunjukin seberapa kangen dan pengennya kamu ketemu teman-teman dan nonton Canisius Cup bareng, tapi tetap hashtag terlindungi sepanjang hari. Jangan wish 24 via Instagram story kalian dan tag teman-teman kalian yang ingin kamu kangenin, dan juga Instagram wish24 @wish24 disinfektan dan Instagram CC 10 orang terbaik hari itu akan memenangkan satu paket pelindungan wish24. Udah seharian nih kita udah lomba English debate, udah seru kan, sekarang udah lapar nih. Saya sih udah mulai lapar, pengen enaknya juara biar berasa jadi juara juga, apa ya. Siang-siang gini sambil nonton gini enaknya ya simple ya. Ya, dan karena ini masih mau semangatin teman-teman yang tanding, biarpun dari rumah kita selalu butuh sesuatu yang bikin semangat, yang bisa bikin cerit. Makan mie sedap cup ayam drink aja deh. Udah gak sabar pengen makan rasa kuah ayam pedas, mie yang kenyal ditambah sama rawit bikin seger. Benar-benar hashtag juara mie pakai rawit. Cara buatnya mudah, nikmat, sedapnya makin juara. Setelah makan mie sedap cup ayam jerit, kita pasti akan menjadi makin semangat nyemangatin teman-teman kita jadi juara. Nunjukin seberapa pengen kamu cobain mie sedap cup ayam jerit dengan menunjukkan sebagaimana sebelum dan sudah cobain hashtag juara mie pakai rawit. Mie sedap cup ayam jerit yang sedapnya makin juara di IG story, dan kamu jangan men-tag @mie-sedap-cup dan Instagram CC. 10 orang dengan reaksi terbaik akan mendapatkan mie sedap cup ayam jerit dan mie sedap. PT Lestari Jaya Raya, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube @LJR Logistics, website ljrlogistics.com, PT Adi Sarana Armada Tbk, PT Sumber Alvaria Trijaya Tbk, PT Kurnia Mitra Duta Sentosa Tbk, PT Kurnia Mitra Duta Sentosa Tbk adalah one-stop solution for beverage need. Selain menyediakan bahan baku minuman seperti sirup, kopi, teh, bahan baku boba, premix powder, Kurnia Mitra Duta Sentosa juga merupakan beverage consultant yang membantu customer dalam recipe making, cost analysis, product knowledge. Jadi untuk yang mau buka kafe, restoran, warung, Kurnia Mitra Duta Sentosa punya produk yang pasti sesuai dengan kebutuhan atau konsep customer. Tersedia berbagai produk Kurnia Mitra seperti Money Syrup, Lavazza Coffee, Milk Lab, Boba King, Easy Powder, Santino Coffee. Cek ya IG-nya KMDS Flavors. Rumah Sakit Premier Bintaro. Yuk, follow, subscribe media sosial Rumah Sakit Premier Bintaro. Follow Instagramnya @rspremierbintaro. Subscribe YouTube channelnya RS Premier Bintaro. Like Facebook page-nya RS Premier Bintaro. Biar kamu yang bisa mendapatkan informasi terbaru tentang kesehatan kamu, orang tua kamu, ataupun orang yang kamu kasihi, dan update tentang kegiatan-kegiatan seru RS Premier Bintaro. Jangan lupa ya guys.
we announce the result of this semifinals, let us first do roll call. Canisius College A. Canisius College A, are you here?
Sorry, we're present.
SMA Regina Pacis Bogor B.
Here and complete.
SMAK 3 Penabur Jakarta.
Here and complete.
SMAK 3 Penabur Jakarta.
Here and complete.
SMAK 1 Penabur Jakarta.
Present complete.
Okay,
Yeah,
that means all of the participants are here. Now I hand it over to the CA, please.
Okay, thank you, Macario. Hi, everyone. Congratulations for making it to the semi-final round. So we'll just announce the result in every room. So on the first chamber, we have Karendi Utomo as the chair. You can announce the result.
Okay, check. Hi, everyone. Am I audible?
You're good.
Yes.
All right, cool. So in chamber number 1, we have, we have Canisius College A as the proposition versus SMA Regina Pacis Bogor B as the opposition. Debating under the motion about terrorism, and we think that this is a very tight debate. With a very slight margin, we finally come to a non-unanimous decision. We come to a split decision, 2-1. Congratulations, the first grand finalist as the proposition side, Canisius College A. Congratulations and commiserations for opposition SMA Regina Pacis Bogor B.
Thank you, Karendi. Congratulations, Canisius A, and commiseration for Pacis B. Okay, now to announce the breakout room 2 result, I call upon the chair, Kabatara.
Okay, thank you. In room 2, debating under the same motion on government team, we had SMK 3 Penabur Jakarta as government, and on opposition, we have SMK 1 Penabur Jakarta A. Judging with me were Chia and Devina. In what was also a very, very tight debate that also came to a split 2-1 decision, the next grand finalist will be the government team, SMK 3 Penabur Jakarta. So congratulations to government team, commiserations to opposition, SMK 1 Penabur Jakarta A.
Thank you, Kabatara. Congratulations for SMAK 3 Penabur, komis untuk SMAK 1 Penabur Jakarta A. Okay, guys, so that would be the end of the semifinals. So right after this, we will have a round for the third place. For the third place. So ada Macario mau announcement dulu. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, everyone, for those who made it to the grand final, congratulations. And those who didn't, don't worry, there will be a fight for third place. And now there will be a break till 3:15. So you can rest up for a while and just just take a break. But before we end this semifinals, I would once again like to thank our sponsors, who without them, this competition would not be able to actually proceed. So once again, I'll give a shout out and many thanks to PT Sayap Mas Utama, Sinar Mas, Jasindo, Howden, PT Eurocars Motor Indonesia, PT Temposcan Pacific Tbk, Binus Universitas, RS Premier, PT Lestari Jaya Raya, PT Adi Sarana Armada Tbk, PT Kurnia Mitra Duta Sentosa Tbk, PT Sumber Alvaria Trijaya Tbk, Milan Seramik, PT Surya Tata Alam Raya, PT Supra Primatama Nusantara Bisnet, UOB Trophy Fish, PT Beton Pracetak Karton, QT Sense, Hot Dog Boy, Indo Cement, PT SBA Scientist Education Sinotif, PT TOS Omega Selaras, PT Santini Luansa Lestari, TAF, PT Multisarana PGAS Solution. Once more, I would like to thank all of our sponsors for supporting this event and for your generous offer and help. Once again, thank you. And for the participants for the third place, please be ready at 3:15. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Makario. But before you guys break, untuk third place, SMAK 3 and Regis B, I want to do coin flip first. So, Regis B, are you here?
Sorry, did you mean SMAK 1?
Yeah, sorry, SMAK 1. SMAK 1, ya, dan Regis B. Regis B, are you here?
Tabungan yang 100% dilakukan secara online. Download aplikasi SMA Plus. Registrasi dan verifikasi data diri secara lengkap. Terus tinggal selfie deh. Banyak keuntungan menariknya loh. Lebih mudah, lebih pintar dengan SMA Plus. Download sekarang. Bank Sinar Mas, biasakan sekarang, luar biasa nanti.
Hemaviton C1000 Total Care. Kini dengan buffer vitamin C 1000 mg, vitamin D3 dan zinc bantu jaga daya tahan tubuh. Sekarang ada Hemaviton C1000 Less Sugar dengan kalori lebih rendah. Boost immune, stay fit, stay active. Hemaviton C1000 Total Care.
Ayo kita liburan. Berangkat.
Isoplas, siap menggantikan cairan tubuh yang hilang dengan 7 ion lengkap mudah diserap dari Wings Food.
Aku cinta mie sedap ayam bakar limau baru. Sedapnya next level.
Virus kuman bakteri cepat menyebar. Baru, WIS 24 disinfektan dengan Actigar bunuh kuman bakteri jamur. WIS 24 disinfecting spray and clean. WIS 24 disinfektan spray surface and air. Baru, WIS 24.
LJ Logistik memiliki 7 layanan dan coverage area LJ Logistik di seluruh Indonesia. LJ Logistik, we are faster and better.
Namun kau hanya diam tersenyum kepadaku.
Dipersembahkan oleh Asuransi Jasa Indonesia.
Alfamart belanja puas harga
Bimbel spesialis matematika fisika kimia, Sinotif tempatnya.
Kami memperkenalkan Toyota Finance. Love, make it yours.
Kamu bisa buka tabungan